Hi, I'm Emily Sherwood. I'm Director of Digital Scholarship at University of Rochester's River Campus Libraries, and I took over the Studio X project in February of 2019.
Hi, I'm Maurini Strub, Director of Organizational Performance and User Engagement. I joined the Project X team as a consultant on assessment methods and tools.
Hi, I'm Meaghan Moody. I'm the Immersive Technologies Librarian for the Digital Scholarship team, and I joined the team just when the pandemic started at the end of February.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. I'm currently an immersive technologies developer through the CLIR Fellowship program. And before that, I worked on XR and AR at the Digital Scholarship Lab for about a year.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for our panel presentation, Creating a Virtual Community for Virtual Reality, Challenges and Solutions for Program Building During a Pandemic. We're thrilled to be here with you today at the Digital Library Federation Fall Forum. Today, we're going to talk about the history of Studio X, the role of assessment in creating spaces and programs, and the goals and challenges that we have faced due to all of the things of 2020. So I would like to start today by defining some terms. As the hub for extended reality at University of Rochester, Studio X fosters a community of cross-disciplinary collaboration, exploration, and peer-to-peer learning that lowers barriers to entry, inspires experimentation, and drives innovative research and teaching with immersive technologies. Extended reality is an umbrella term for real and virtual combined environments. Augmented reality, or AR, places digital content within the real world. So you might want to think about games like Pokemon Go, or say you want to purchase a pair of glasses and you use an app on your phone to virtually try on the glasses to see how they look before you purchase them. Virtual reality, or VR, is more immersive. Rather than digital content entering our reality, we enter the digital space where we can engage with virtual worlds, create art, interact with other people, etc. And then mixed reality is a merging of the two, where the physical and the digital coexist and interact. One of the reasons that it made sense to explore a unified approach to supporting XR efforts at the University of Rochester was that we already had a large number of researchers actively working in the field, including faculty from the Medical Center, Eastman School of Music, Warner School of Education, and the College of Arts, Science, and Engineering. Building a central program in space for support also made sense because of the strong interdisciplinary nature of XR. Just like digital scholarship, XR requires expertise from multiple disciplines, which has been recognized by our administration and faculty. For example, as part of a National Science Foundation grant, we have 62 doctoral students from electrical and computer engineering, optics, biomedical engineering, brain and cognitive science, computer science, and neuroscience who will be trained in the skills needed to advance XR technologies. This grant reimagines the traditional hyper-focused and siloed nature of doctoral studies by acknowledging that these emerging areas of research require a broader perspective and a range of expertise. In order to understand what we might need in a centralized program for XR, we pulled together a steering committee comprised of stakeholders from across the college. That group started planning for a dedicated space and program. Lauren DeMonte, now Associate Dean of Learning, Research, and Digital Strategies, ran a series of activities called Design Charrettes. Essentially, she used design thinking and hands-on problem solving to surface user needs around the physical requirements of the space, and then use that information in order to create a vision for the program. We held 4 charrette sessions and engaged with 121 participants who told us they wanted a program that lowered barriers to entry, facilitated interdisciplinary work, supported peer-to-peer learning, and included a space that was flexible, multi-purpose, and future-proof. This last one's challenging. When I think about the information that came out of the functional program, what I came to understand is that people really wanted access. They wanted access to space to work collaboratively, particularly space that is welcoming to students and faculty from across the college. They wanted access to expertise from staff and from their peers in ways that lowered barriers to entry so that they could readily participate in XR activities. And they wanted access to technology, but with the understanding that technology will change and we will need to update and maintain it as the field grows. The functional program that was created based on those design charrettes included different types of spaces. So the salon is the heart of Studio X. Its purpose is to encourage exploration and learning. It includes an open area with a mix of tables and seating to promote collaboration and informal interactions that will really help foster a sense of community. The Innovation Suite enables research-intensive engagement and learning. It accommodates larger interdisciplinary research teams and includes access to high-performance workstations and other specialized equipment. There are 4 collaboration rooms that will facilitate XR exploration and creation and will be central to the work emerging out of Studio X. For example, PhD students mentoring XR capstone projects or groups working on class projects for digital history or computer science courses will be able to book these rooms for team meetings and long-term project work. The Learning Hub supports formal and informal hands-on learning. This flexible learning space will host a range of workshops, classes, open office hours, and showcase events. And of course, there's a dedicated staff space that will allow Studio X staff to work independently, but in close proximity to the students and faculty who may need access to their expertise. And there will be 6 high-end workstations for individual exploration and project development. I took over the project for Studio X in February of 2019. Right away, I started meeting with stakeholders and working with our team in advancement and alumni relations on fundraising. The digital scholarship team spent time thinking about how we could expand our current expertise and services to more fully support Studio X. And we had a pretty tight deadline to get everything up and running by the fall 2020. And despite a number of delays, and some of them very small, we were mostly on track until March 2020. Even when the pandemic hit, we held out hope that things would be somewhat back to normal by the end of May and construction could begin. But of course, that didn't happen. So now we look ahead to 2021, when we will be able to realize the space. But before then, we have already started building on the program.
All right, let's dive into assessment. So looking at its etymology, we learned that assessment or assess comes from Latin, the past participle of accedere, which means to sit beside. Assessment is the scaffolding that sits beside us when we're doing our jobs, especially during decision making, and can provide a valuable lens when we're trying to describe why we make the choices that we do. Oftentimes, evaluation, assessment, and research are used interchangeably. But here's a quick defining distinction. Evaluation is judgmental, uses grading, and focuses on achievement. It doesn't necessarily explain why. Research attempts to answer why, but takes significantly more time, uses control groups, control variations, and provides evidence that can be broadly applied. Assessment borrows from both practices, but it's its own beast by being non-judgmental and being used for improvement. Assessment informs our functional program. What is a functional program? It describes the requirements which a building, space, or program must satisfy in order to support and enhance human activities. They're also often referred to as design briefs, facility briefs, architectural programs, owner statements of requirements, space needs analysis, or simply programs. The programming process seeks to answer the following questions. What is the nature and scope of the problem? What information is required to develop a proper solution to the problem? How much and what type of solution is required? What solution will be needed in the next 5 to 10 years to continue to operate efficiently? For those of you unfamiliar with participatory design, it is an approach to design attempting to actively involve all stakeholders in the design process to help ensure that the finishing result meets their needs and is usable. Here at Rochester, we close the loop on assessment by bringing the same users who helped us with assessment back in and sharing results back out with our community to not only close the loop, but also as a check. Did we hear you correctly? It's also the beginning of a conversation. We employ our users in the design of spaces and programs, and I'd argue is one of the early ways that we begin to build community that has a sense of ownership, engagement, and investment in library services. While Studio X was in its planning stages, I hadn't yet joined the organization, but I've been involved in space programming projects that have utilized these methods, and I'm going to quickly cover many of these. Many of these were used when Rochester was surfacing user needs for this project, but please note this is by no means a comprehensive list, but when it comes down to it, it's basically some of my favorite methods. I'll cover, when it comes to observations, observations can be something as simple as a simple head count to actually recording what artifacts users have in their physical spaces as they're doing work. We also have interviews, which I'm going to cover in the coming slides, of which there's contextual inquiry, which is studying users in her environment where they're actually doing the work. Another method I like for interviews is called vox pops, short for voices of expression. And they're basically 30 second to 1 minute single question interviews. You've probably seen a variant of them on late night talk shows where they ask random strangers questions in the middle of a city. When it comes to focus groups are focused conversations or interviews with larger groups of people. Focus groups can take a range of formats, and they range from forum like town halls to advisory groups, which are a specialized focus group that have a much longer term commitment, typically a year or more. Charrette design, which if you're unfamiliar with charrettes, are short collaborative meetings during which users can talk through, collaborate, and sketch designs to explore and share broad diversity of design ideas. Those design ideas often surface articulated and unarticulated needs. Another fan favorite is furniture fairs, which are kind of like your local to you institutional trade show, where users can come and try out furniture solutions that we're going to deploy in the space. Designers and project team members are there to listen and capture what users are saying about the furniture, as well as do some lightweight probing. And oftentimes there'll be a brief questionnaire soliciting feedback about that item's form and function. When it comes to program needs, we do needs and gaps analysis most frequently with surveys or questionnaires. And again, we'll get into that as well as interviews. But one of my other favorite tools to use are whiteboards. And whiteboards are a really informal way of engaging your community. One of the favorite prompts I like to use is I wish, I like, I wonder, where users are invited to, with not only a prompt, but a prompt that's done with a graphical element to it to invite them, and they're left with a marker. And what's cool about it is that not only do they leave their responses, oftentimes you see dialogue between users where people will add to or yes and or say like, no, but what about? And it's actually a really fun thing to observe in a physical space. Interviews we'll get to in a bit, and related to that, contextual inquiry. When it came to the faculty interviews, when Meaghan and Emily came to me about Studio X, the very first thing I asked them to do before we met was to identify the goals and needs of conducting this survey. What did they most need to learn about faculty behavior before we sat down to design the questions? Because every question that we asked should always lead back to those goals and needs. In this case, their goals and needs were to learn about faculty's current and aspirational work with XR, as well as the challenges that they encountered. When it comes to question order, it's very much an art form, and it's also very much like a relationship. So let's imagine a scenario where you've gone to a dinner party and you've been introduced to a new person. As you're getting to know them, you don't jump into the burning questions or the questions that require intimacy or vulnerability. You're building a relationship with that person, right? Similarly with your participants. So arranging the questions from least intrusive or things that don't matter as much as someone knows about you to the ones that require vulnerability and demonstrating where the participant may have gaps or insufficiencies is critical. But more importantly, it's also important for you as an interviewer to give visual signals that what they're sharing is interesting. And to be honest, it should be, because you initiated this conversation or interview. And just like all conversations, you also don't want to end on a tough topic. So you want to make sure that you wind down to your closing questions. In essence, de-escalate to softer questions so that the participant leaves the experience with a positive affiliation towards you and the project. One of my favorite ways to close is to have an aspirational type question towards the end. For example, if there's one thing that you could change or one thing that you could do to improve, oftentimes participants will come back to me after the interview and say, I've been thinking a lot about that question, and here's some additional thoughts I have on it, which is great. When it comes to question refinement, you want to always remember language informality. Remember, an interview is a conversation, not an interrogation. I encourage you to read your questions out loud before your interview date. If it doesn't sound like your normal conversational speaking voice, you need to probably rework it. Your participant will notice, and it can often become an interview barrier if language is too formal. You also want to design them so that they invite dialogue, right? Your goal is to invite dialogue where your participant get to the point where they're volunteering information. You don't have to actually ask because they're just as animated about the topic. And one of the ways that we can do this is designing anticipatory probing questions. Although it can be hard to predict a participant's response, you want to try to develop these in advance. Many times you won't need them. People kind of like talking about themselves and their work, but occasionally you'll get someone that you have to draw out, and it's nice to have these in your back pocket. This is really relevant in face-to-face and virtual environments. Oftentimes people bury themselves behind the technology, and it actually adds an additional barrier to people having a conversation and initiating dialogue. So my advice to you is ditch your laptop. Record your interview in two ways. Video and audio is fine, but also consider using audio, and just old school notes. One of my low budget ways of transcribing audio that's been recorded is to do a private upload to YouTube, run their closed captioning on it, and then download the closed captioning transcript. It's not perfect, but it gets enough of it that all that I'm doing is refining and tweaking the transcript. I introduced Meaghan to one of my favorite methods for analyzing qualitative data, affinity diagramming. It's a tool that's used to organize related ideas, data, or facts into distinct clusters. And if you've ever done card sorting, it's kind of, for web design, it's very similar. Its power is that it allows you to become truly immersed in all of your data collectively, simultaneously. And I'm not gonna lie, you either love it or hate it as a method. It's a messy process, but the end product is oh so worth it. So check it out if you haven't heard of it before. When we first started talking about Studio X, born out of perhaps my own ignorance, I suggested that we include an introduction to AR, VR, and XR. I knew that in library land, we talked about these topics, but I barely understood the distinction and wondered about our users' understanding or clarity about the topic. So I recommended that we start the survey by creating a shared understanding of the domain that we were talking about. We did that by including introductory text about survey goals, but also incorporating a video that would not only explain concepts easily, but to bring a different level of engagement. At this point, we were about 3 months into the pandemic, and I was concerned about yet another survey with little interaction or engaging content being dismissed, case in hand. When you design your survey, you want to think ahead to the analysis portion. Another thing I'd encourage you to ditch are the multiple selection choice options. So you frequently see checkbox options. While it's tempting to get as much feedback as you can from your users, oftentimes this type of tool ends up obscuring a priority or a direction that your users need. By forcing them to make a choice with a conventional multiple choice where you have only one choice to make, you can actually help yourself on the back end for analysis. When it comes to asking the questions for analysis, we structure the question first, or the questionnaire / survey by establishing a baseline of users' experience with XR. We started asking them about their experiences with XR and their familiarity with tools. We then moved on to questions about their learning styles and on to questions that asked them to assess their future needs, both near-term and long-term, for skilling up. We also provided them with the opportunity to stay in touch. We anticipated this survey being one form of communication about Studio X that could build anticipation for the coming services. So the opt-in was twofold, based on the assumption that if they were opting in, they were likely excited about this project and would provide us with a pool of people who could be early adopters or super users of the space, services and resources, and two, possibly be potential candidates for recruitment to later focus groups. The last thing that we discussed as we created the survey was making sure that we had enough responses. We weren't looking for statistical significance, it wasn't research, but we needed just enough information to inform and help us to prioritize our programming. Here I advised over recruiting, so multiple channels and multiple calls to help meet their targeted number of responses. Typically in surveys, we see response rates anywhere from 8 to 30%, with 30% being a really strong response rate. It's sad, I know. So meeting their target responses would likely require marketing or recruiting in multiple channels. So I've touched on all of the ways that we have used assessment to kind of inform the design of Studio X and the role of assessment.
Hi, this is Meaghan. Sebastian and I are now going to discuss some goals and challenges, and dare I say some opportunities of 2020. And really what we're talking about here is community building, getting buy-in, building excitement, all surrounding XR technologies at the University of Rochester. These technologies offer opportunities to explore, practice, and learn a subject through multisensory experiences that help deepen learning and create opportunities for new discovery. Yet they're still very inaccessible in that they're costly, have a steep learning curve, and are sometimes seen as a novelty. So in a lot of ways, they already inherently present challenges to new users. But then we add into the mix the pandemic of 2020 that is still unfolding. We're still trying to understand its long-term impact, and it's just adding another fun layer of complexity to this mix. Nevertheless, we would like to share some examples of the ways in which we've been navigating this situation. But before I dive into that, let's first talk about some factors that help shape a successful XR program in general. So this EDUCAUSE HP Campus of the Future report came out in March of 2020. The study was informed by 47 interviews with deans, directors, librarians, instructional designers, and other XR practitioners across 17 XR participating institutions in the US. And here are some of their key findings. First, both faculty and institutional leadership are critical to the success of XR deployment. So this means active XR research by faculty and really showcasing those examples, as well as having budgetary support and encouragement from institutional leadership. Next, an XR special initiative provides time for experimentation and new ideas. Dedicated staff, such as myself, is necessary to support these technologies and create a positive user experience. XR projects are inherently very multidisciplinary and require many different perspectives and expertise. Centering the program in a cross-unit space such as that of the library really helps to facilitate that collaboration. Providing space and access to the technology is key. The space is described in the report as somewhat of a makerspace combined with a computer lab. And lastly, providing equal access for all students. Again, these technologies are costly, and it's really a matter of social equity. So I found this report to be particularly interesting because these were all things we were attempting to do at the University of Rochester, and it kind of reaffirmed my excitement in being part of this program. And you may have noticed that I bolded the last 3 points because they are particularly difficult to accomplish without having a physical space. Which brings me to my next point. What factors lead to a successful XR program in 2020? So before the pandemic, when I was a newly minted immersive technologies librarian, I saw all of these pieces that I just discussed on the last slide falling into place. I joined the University of Rochester at the end of February, and then the pandemic really started to set in. And we were all just thrown this curveball and I know I'm putting it extremely and insufficiently, that is 2020. So things are very different. Work and life has changed. We're all working through a variety of crises. We're worried, angry, and very, very tired. So how do you navigate this? How do you get people excited about technologies that are still pretty inaccessible? And how do you do virtual reality? Well, I get really excited about the possibilities of XR. I can't say I was prepared to be this virtual. So one way to approach the situation was for us to radically shift our perspectives, which was admittedly at first a little hard, but then also a major relief. So we wouldn't have our physical communal hub for XR teaching, research, and learning, but we could continue with our community building and programming. Studio X is more than just a physical space. And this year became what we are referring to as the year of the test. We could do more research, try things out, breathe and think, which is very much in the spirit of Studio X, which is a space for low stakes experimentation. So we could invest more time in growing relationships, creating multiple points of contact, finding our champions and first adopters, and just continuing to build excitement. Also, can I say that it's really nice not to have to figure out ways to keep headsets hygienic and safe for users during a public health crisis, at least having to do it very quickly. So instead we can be more intentional and better informed about this approach. So now I'll discuss our community building strategies and the challenges presented by 2020 and how we pivoted. So I think it's important when you start any new project or when you're starting a new position that you start to meet with your stakeholders to really understand their needs, their motivations, and where they want to go. So one of my first projects was to conduct faculty interviews and do a student survey that Maurini discussed earlier to understand these needs to inform our future programming for Studio X. So ideally, I would have loved to do this in person. I really enjoy that personal contact, being in, and I would have gone to faculty members' offices. I would have gotten to know their departments. It also would have been really great to maybe walk around campus a little bit to familiarize myself. But of course, this wasn't possible. So we shifted everything to Zoom and we distributed our student survey virtually. So I just want to touch on some of the challenges here. As I'm sure you all know, there was this this frenzy of the transition from on-campus to virtual. Folks were very busy. It was difficult, understandably, and it was difficult to arrange some of these meetings. Also, we had to think very creatively about how to create and distribute the student survey because Studio X was and is still very new to students, as well as XR concepts and tools. So a previous CARP library fellow and myself worked very closely with Maurini to think about how we could do this. So for the student survey, we created 2 short videos, one talking about what exactly Studio X is and what it would do and be and have, and then also a second video to define our terms. And these, they were both very short and would help our users get up to speed before they could answer the questions. And then also they were great because we later took these videos and we embedded them on our website. And I ended up carrying out 8 half-hour interviews with faculty members across disciplines. The conversations were fascinating and I learned so much. And then I was also delighted to see that 58 students responded to our survey, which we disseminated in over a few weeks in July, mostly via email. And many students asked to be involved and expressed a lot of excitement. The feedback both from faculty and students was immensely helpful. And it was great to see the correlation between student and faculty needs. So they both asked us to demystify XR and make it super, super accessible, and then to also create low stakes introductory learning opportunities for XR. So this process helped us to lay the groundwork for our next steps. One of which was outreach. So I don't know about you, but this is generally how I feel about outreach. And I feel like a lot of you will understand and empathize with this. Campus can often be so overprogrammed and it can be challenging to compete with all of those events, especially if you think back to your own experience as a student and you're attending classes and doing research and working and trying to have fun and sleep and all those good things. So it can be obviously, challenging to really connect with people. And what we're really talking about here is engagement. We wanted to create meaningful connections with people, and this takes time and consistency and fortitude to really create that mutual understanding and partnership. But outreach in 2020 is a different animal altogether. Everybody is coping. Everything feels simultaneously very day-to-day, and also like it's the longest year ever, or like time is not even moving. And there's just obviously a lot going on, a lot to think about, and it's difficult to get people's attention. So some of our strategies here were, first, we created a style guide with design assets to create a consistent, recognizable look and feel. We also found our partners in crime and invested in those relationships. So that was our library communications and social media team, And we partnered with other librarians and liaisons across the library. In particular, we worked very closely with one of our STEM librarians to do all of the programming. And then also, this was external to the library across campus. We met with the Career Center, the Office of Undergraduate Research, the Center for Leadership and Diversity. These were all virtual meetings that were carried out after the initial rush of the spring, which was much better for folks. And I think in some ways, the virtual meetings were easier for people to attend because it's very easy to jump onto a Zoom call. And then we also created a listserv website and newsletter to keep that communication consistent, to loop people in, to make sure they felt included. And next, we continued working with classes. We did some virtual class visits and integrations. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then lastly, we've really leaned into what we're calling strategic spamming via email and social media, taking advantage of all the contacts, asking people for suggestions, and just being very persistent. The nature of our work with faculty also changed, and in some ways for the better. So for example, because of shifting projects, we had time to do a faculty development workshop series, and there was an XR session. And we think we had better turnout because of the pandemic. And in this instance, I could really start to see that XR hub starting to form. We had faculty across disciplines doing really interesting work and who don't normally have the opportunity to talk to one another. So it was fascinating to listen to those conversations. We also had some of the faculty that I had interviewed participated both as attendees as well as presenters. So we're continuing those points of contact. And then one really nice thing that came out of this project was documentation and resources. Something that I'm sure we all struggle to do is creating documentation. And because of this, we were able to be very intentional about it. And then we were able to use a lot of those resources for our website and for other projects. As I mentioned before, we can also continue to work with classes. This summer, for example, we provided guidance as part of an 8-week program run by faculty and students in the Warner Graduate School of Education. So this particular project was focused on sustainability education in SOTUS, New York. Over the summer, they developed an educational augmented reality scavenger hunt. And we led a workshop initially and then provided feedback throughout the process. And it's so great to collaborate with education faculty who are doing work with XR tools and methods. It's so beneficial for us to better understand the impact of these technologies. And then also, as mentioned, Emily mentioned earlier, we are working with the NSF doctoral students. We're meeting with them in just a few weeks during one of their class sessions so that we can better understand their needs for their semester-long group projects next fall. And then paradoxically, the pandemic has made it easier to foster external relationships. So Emily and I are both on the Frameless Labs XR Symposium Committee at RIT. So we're in our 5th year now, and these planning meetings usually take place in person. So because of the shift to virtual, we've been able to attend to almost all of the meetings. And then that also allowed us to really get to know faculty at RIT and learn about their research and expertise. And it's helped us forge stronger relationships, and we can see more intersections for collaboration and just crowdsourcing ideas and that sort of thing. Lastly, it's just been much easier to participate in the XR scholarly community. Myself, I've attended 6 conferences since the start of the pandemic and been able to engage with XR practitioners across the world. There is no way I would have been able to attend all of these conferences if they had been all in person. So I've learned so much and seen some really exciting work that's been done across the world. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Sebastian, who will discuss some of the ways we've approached programming for Studio X.
Okay, so I'll just begin by talking about some of the programs that we piloted in the fall of 2020. The interviews and the preliminary surveys that we conducted pointed us towards needing introductory workshops that were low stakes but interesting enough to keep people engaged. So for us, that meant a high interactive content. Having participants actually open the project on their computer and participate that way, so they weren't just like watching us read things off the screen at them. So that took the form of mostly virtual workshops. I conducted a introductory Unity workshop based on scripting and also how the camera works in Unity. Other CARP fellows, other people in Situates have done workshops in Blender, which is a very common 3D authoring tool. And in addition to workshops, we're also going to hold events with speakers from the industry that we're really excited about. We've invited a bunch of scholars, artists, professionals, and we really hope those will augment our workshop series and really sort of provide the professional perspective for what we're doing. The other thing that I'm excited about is drop-in hours, we're calling them, sort of like office hours-esque things, to have students come by with questions they might have. When I was first learning Unity, the online documentation and online videos were often overwhelming, and I think someone who had been there before and was willing to talk to me about their experience would have been really useful, and someone who could just be there to like answer some random question they may have. So we've been holding hour-long office hours twice a week. And we've chosen the platform as Discord, which is a pretty popular messaging app that has voice and video support. The reason we chose Discord over other apps is that Discord is already pretty heavily used. So sort of the idea of meeting students where they already are meeting played a key role in that. Okay, now I'm going to go through and discuss some of the challenges that we faced. Even if we were in person, there of course would be challenges in trying to teach these complicated tools, but since we've been online, there have been many new challenges. One big one that we noticed right off the bat was that teaching 3D authoring tools is extremely difficult virtually, because one of the big skill sets you need to learn as a beginner is how to move around using the keyboard and the mouse in 3D space fluidly, and it's really hard to show that over Zoom, and it's also really hard to see what students are doing wrong over Zoom. In past demos, we've had people share their screen, and then we could see what they were doing, but you still can't see the keys they're pressing or the mouse movements they're doing, and you can only target one student at a time like that. And it disrupts the flow of the workshop, which is also a huge problem. So just teaching these tools has been pretty challenging online. Another huge problem is that we've been having is sort of the like, it's hard as a person conducting these workshops to just casually look over and see if a student is having either an issue or is doing something really cool that you haven't thought of in the software. So you can't like, everything has to be set up and everything sort of has to happen not organically. So that's been really frustrating. Yeah, and then the other thing, which you I'm sure have felt just like I have, is that being on Zoom is pretty hard just in itself. Just like looking at the screen and not being near real people, that's pretty hard. And then on top of that, the hardware and software requirements for running, especially Unity, are pretty serious. And we can't always count on students having a laptop that can run Unity. And in the library at the University of Rochester, this wouldn't be a problem because all those computers would be able to run Unity. But doing it virtually has, you of course can't rely on that. So we really had to downsize the project to use like the most low impact assets that we possibly could, the most low impact textures that we possibly could, just so people would be able to run it. And then another problem with Zoom specifically is how do we get students engaged in the workshop? For example, the first one we had about a couple of people, and none of them turned their cameras on. And at that point, do you force them to turn their cameras on? They're already taking the time out of their day to come to your workshop, so you probably don't want to pressure them, but at the same time, just teaching into a bunch of blank screens is pretty rough. So yeah, so we've been struggling with that also. Um, a light spot with that is that we've just sort of doing some icebreakers, and that has really helped with the engagement. Um, yeah. The other thing that ties back into Zoom fatigue is we get pretty high sign-up numbers for these workshops, but then they dwindle to more like less than a fourth of the actual participants end up showing up. And we think that has a lot to do with people are just tired of being on Zoom all day and don't want to add another hour to that. Okay, and some ideas that we've had to solve some of these problems. I mentioned some of them on the last slide, but I'll just go into more detail here. The first and the biggest source of these have been the feedback from the students that have shown up to the workshops. And we have had students show up to the workshops and be really engaged and really seem to care about the future of Studio X, which is really heartening to see. In the last one I did in particular, there was a student who at the end of the workshop stayed for like 5 or 10 minutes and just sort of talked about what he wanted to see for further Studio X programming and what he liked about the workshop and what he thought could be done better. So stuff like that was really great to see, and really helped us figure out like, oh, okay, so maybe like the time that we're holding them, for example, could be improved on. So we can try and avoid the number of classes that it conflicts with, for example. And then also icebreakers, that's going to be a huge thing moving forward. The icebreaker that we had for the first workshop that I did was game specific. It was like, what game are you playing, or what games do you enjoy the most? And another piece of feedback we got was that the Unity workshops are too game specific, and that actually broadening the scope of the workshop could be really useful, which is a really good point, I think. Even though Unity is a game engine technically, it can be used for all sorts of different things, films, renderings of photorealistic models in real estate, all sorts of things. So I think emphasizing the broadness of the tool and marketing it towards a broader audience is a really great idea. And that was a student that provided that advice. We demoed for a couple of the librarians at the University of Rochester, and that was a really useful experience because it emphasized like just little things in the project that could just be made that much simpler. So then there was just one less bump in the road that the user could run into. So for example, like in Unity, you can expand out in the view hierarchy, like all the game objects. And I realized people were just doing that accidentally and then just getting lost in the sea of just all the like the hedges and all the cubes and all the and everything in the environment that you need to make an environment. So I just hid those from the user, so they'd need to like click 4 or 5 times to open it, not just once. So just like stuff like that to make the project more user friendly and better for beginners. And then, yeah, uh, yeah. So and then I just like to share this piece of advice. I like to share it at the end of my workshop. That's based on programming, based on my own experience with programming, is that stuff like software development and programming in particular, you're going to fail so many more times than you're going to succeed. So you need to really find the joy in the small successes you have, the small times you succeed. And I like to end my workshops like that. And I've certainly been feeling like that with the workshops also, just sort of generally. It's really important to take heart, for example, when a student is really interested in seeing the future of Studio X. So yeah. And so to wrap up, I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone who has been super helpful. We've had a ton of support from administrators, the University Advancement Office, faculty, professors, and a ton of people across the library. And that honestly doesn't even come close to the number of people and services and programs that have offered their help to promote our programming. In the email list that Meaghan mentioned earlier in the talk, we're really indebted to these people, and they each left a huge impact on our work and continue to do so. So yeah, I'd just like to say thanks on behalf of the whole StudioEdge team.